Let me just start here with the bookworm section. So I have a note in here for every episode of the podcast that we've done. And these notes look something like this. I'll go into edit mode so you can see everything that's in here. So I have this YAML metadata at the top, which just tags it with Bookworm, but then also has Joe's rating for the book and my rating for the book. And these are separate, and they're based on like the Amazon sort of 5-star ratings. I use data view to pull all of those into a lists, and I have it sorted based on like my the descending order based on my rating. So that way, if someone asks me like, "Hey, what are some of the best books that you've read?" I can go to Obsidian, just look at the list of episodes and grab the books that way.
Oh, I love it. Okay, we're putting a pin in that. I'd like to maybe see that if possible.
So then I've got a link to the actual book page, who it's by, who picked the book, when we published it. I grabbed the MP3 file from Libsyn so I can actually play the episode inline if I wanted to. And then from the Bookworm website, when we publish it, I just grab all of the links and paste those in here as well. The book itself, let's take a look at liminal thinking here. All right. So I have a format for this where, again, YAML metadata at the top, book notes and Bookworm, and then I've got some info on the book, who it was by, when we covered it. I do have the mind map. I'll come back to the 3-sentence summary here in a second. Here's the mind map. I use MindNode, and in MindNode, you can actually, I'm not sure if they still offer this service, but they did a while back. Maybe grandfathered it out, but they have this My MindNode service where you can publish it to the web. So this is an iframe. The other alternative to this would just be to export it as a PDF and drop that in. I've done that in the past as well. But I do like these iframes. So this allows me to zoom in, zoom out, and I can basically like navigate through this like I would. Here is the liminal thinking chart that I was telling you about, reality, the unknowable, your experiences based on top of that, your attention, that's really what you're able to focus on. Just a random stat from this that stuck with me. We can take in 11 million bits of information per second, but the amount of information we can focus on is like 50 bits. It's like a crazy small percentage. So that's basically what everything else is built off of: your theories, your judgments, your beliefs. And then at the top is the bubble of belief. And kind of how you change that is you test things and you embrace the learning loop. He explains that a little bit down here. Your needs, your beliefs drive your actions, drive your results. You get feedback, and then you just kind of rinse and repeat. So this is what the MindNode file looks like, and this is the basis here. So then I publish this as an iframe. Another thing you can do with MindNode is you can export as a Markdown file. So I export as Markdown, and then I just copy paste that Markdown, throw notes on the top of it, and then the rest of this is just straight out of MindNode. So it's all broken down by the different level headers, and it's got the different sections here. And I'll add links to pages here where I want to extend the conversation about a particular topic. So like this limiting beliefs, so I have a link to limiting beliefs, and I have a basic definition of this, but this is going to pop up other places. And by creating its own page, I can now link to this from the other books where this would mention, or that would be mentioned. I do have action items from reading these books. I share these on the podcast too, but I use the task formatting for these so I can find all my incompleted tasks. And it's basically the only sorts of tasks I track in here at the moment, but I got to follow up on them before, we record next. Bubble belief. So this is just an example of like the notes. There's a lot here. I have my own emoji system, which I've been doing for a long time. You could use tags for this as well, but I find this helpful when I'm looking at the notes visually. So the quote bubble, these are quotes. And actually I would also tag this with hashtag quote so I can bring that into my quote book later. The key is a key idea. The light bulb is just kind of like an inspiration point. Every once in a while, something will just completely blow my mind. I'll have a mind blown emoji. If there's something I want to add to the outline for Bookworm, I'll have like a talking head icon. But yeah, so this is kind of what they look like. Everything is foldable because I have those settings turned on.
I like the light bulb ones. Yeah, I actually slight tangent, not to derail you too much, but have you? I'm curious. Have you come across this one?
No, Theater of War. I can't tell who it's by, but
Brian. I'm going to not be able to pronounce his last name.
all right.
Doris. It's pretty great. We'll get back. This is like a 30-second tangent, but it's essentially what ancient Greek tragedies can teach us, and it delves deeply into
Nice.
yeah, it's delves deeply into something like PTSD, but there's another name for it maybe
Mm.
that I think ties into our beliefs and kind of this moral ambiguity that comes up. But the reason I brought it up is because I was just looking at it today, and there's this quote in there: "Tragedy was not simply a matter of entertainment; it was an ancient technology." It was like this big punch. I was like, "Whoa!" So that's where I like that idea of using like a light bulb. It's like I don't know where
Yeah.
I'm going with this, but it needs to be. It's a light bulb moment.
Yep. Yeah, I like that. Side note to your side note, I always, when someone mentions a book, I jot it down, and if I can, I
Huh?
immediately buy it. Uh,
Oh, really?
yeah, I have this bookshelf behind me which is full of books, and most of them I have read. But I think that there is value even in collecting books that you haven't read all the way through. Uh,
Yeah. Hmm.
and Lore talks about this with she calls it the anti-library, I believe, and I don't take it that far. Like I do intend to read every book that I buy. Every once in a while, I'll finish a book for Bookworm. I'll have like some time, and I'll do a gap book in between. And I've done less of those lately than I like, but a lot of those books that someone just mentions and I buy and they're sitting on my bookshelf somewhere, or sitting on my nightstand. Those are the ones that I'll pick up as a gap book.
Hmm.
And some of the best insights I've gotten have been from those. It's a really, I mean, even though it's like $20 a book, whatever, I could always buy the hardcover physical ones. I consider that one of the best investments I can make.
I think there's a lot to that. And speaking of the bookshelf, if you are far enough away from the bookshelf and you look at it, like bookshelves have been around forever, as long as there have been books, it
Hmm.
is a map.
Yeah,
These things
true.
are next to each other, and but you've put them there for a reason. You can kind of recall one book because of its placement to another book, or if you're looking at one book, thoughts come into your mind. Then you look at the book
Yep.
right next to it,
Yep.
and those start to kind of talk to each other in strange ways.
Yes, that gets into how to read a book. We're gonna have to talk about that for sure. One second on that though, before we get there, the 3 sentence summary. So I've kind of shared like I drop in the mind map, I drop in the notes, just to close this loop. This is the last thing I'll do when I create a new book note. Is I will force myself to summarize everything that is below. So I'm reviewing my notes when I'm putting them in here. I'm adding the links, creating new pages where it makes sense, and then I'm summarizing all of that into 3 sentences. And
Wow.
that's difficult sometimes, like picking the things that you're going to include in the summary and which ones you're going to neglect. But that just reinforces the whole signal versus noise idea, right? And what stands out to me from these books that I read.
I have a note
Now,
that I'm going to try out the sentence summary a bit more. I love the constraint. It's like any
yeah,
of these constraints just to like, okay, I'm up for it.
yep,
I'm up for the challenge.
totally. So, How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler. This is a phenomenal classic book. Neither Joe nor I liked it when we read it, um, but it's stuck with me. And this one, he talks about. Let me go back in edit mode here. There are a couple. Here we go. Levels of reading, and this is the point where I really felt enabled not to try and recreate everything that I was reading. So
Yeah.
elementary level is where you're asking, what does the sentence say? Inspectional reading is where you're asking, what is the book about? Analytical reading is where you're asking many organized questions. And then syntopical reading is when you're placing these books in relation with one another. Okay. So in this book, Mortimer Adler basically says when you're reading a book, you're having a conversation with the author. And in a conversation, you are free to disagree with the other person. I had never really thought about it that way. I was like, read the bios and like, this person's really successful. I haven't done anything. I guess I better just shut up and listen to them. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
but,
Exactly.
but I felt overwhelmed by the amount of information that I was not applying in my life then when I kept reading these books. So like that's not sustainable. And like, well, there's got to be
Mhm.
a better way. It was actually when I read Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon that that's where this started, because that was tangentially related to my belief that I was not creative. Uh, because I play music and I like to write songs, I would write a song and then I would realize that I stole the chord progression from this other song. And when I heard it on the radio, I'd get frustrated and be like, oh man, I just can't create. I don't have that gene. I can't make up anything completely original. And when I read Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon, he basically said that when you create something, you're really just connecting dots. There's the connection to the graph view in ways that haven't been done before. So the dots themselves are not original. And at that point, I was like, aha, creativity is a formula. I just need to connect or collect better dots, and then my brain
Mm.
will connect them. Whatever comes out is the natural output of this equation. And I don't have to judge it anymore. It just is what it is. The only way to influence this is to just figure out how to collect some better dots. So
You said that really well. I just want to take a moment to kind of, remind myself to watch this point, because that's so well said. Somewhere in society, somewhere where we're brought up, it's the idea of the creative, genius who like comes up from scratch these ideas, and that's harming more people than I realized. I think, being in the PKM community, I was like, oh my gosh, like it's hard. This idea that, oh, I'm not creative or whatever, and therefore I shouldn't be doing things. It's getting in a lot of people's way more than I truly realized. And what you said is I think the best way to overcome that. So definitely, thanks for articulating it so effectively.
yeah, I actually today as we record this, we're releasing our Obsidian course over at the Sweet Setup, and I have a section in there on just like general PKM stuff. And there is one video in particular I created. The title is "You Are Creative," and it's kind of trying to bust this myth that, oh, I'm not creative. I see all these other people who are creating awesome stuff, but that's just not for me. Somebody told a story one time that when you're a little kid and you give a little kid a box of crayons, they're not sitting there wondering like, well, what are these for? They just start drawing, and over time, they share their work, and maybe they don't get the response that they were hoping for, and so they just decide not to try anymore. And really, creativity is getting the guts to ask for your crayons back.
I love it. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So that idea from Austin Kleon and connecting the dots, when I first stumbled onto, initially it was Roam Research and then Obsidian, I was like, oh, so this is basically a representation of what is in my brain. And I was
Mhm.
immediately drawn to that because for the first time I now had the potential, getting back to like the map is not the territory. I'm the cartographer. I have to create these dots and connect them strategically so they're actually providing me the value that I think they have, but it was a visual representation of what was actually inside of my head.
Yeah, that's that's quite amazing. Okay, so Mike, I think we're probably let's go for about 9 more minutes or so, and then we'll
Okay,
see if anyone has some questions for you. I'm sure they do.
sure. So, do you mind if I jump into the sketchnote stuff real quick?
You
Because I
go where
think
you,
that's where
yeah,
the graph stuff provides the most value for me.
yeah, please
Um,
do.
so I was taking notes. I've always been a little bit of a tech nerd. Um, my dad owned a software company. I grew up with like an Apple IIe in the living room, banging on it since I was 2 years old. And around 2017, as you can see here on the left, I decided that I was not getting as much from my notes as I wanted to, taking them digitally. So I started doing sketch notes. And actually, 2017, this is the point where I started doing them on the iPad using the Apple Pencil. Because when you physically write out your notes, you can't capture word for word what's being said. You have to synthesize what's being said and basically get the gist of it and what's important. Well, sketchnotes is like that to the nth degree. So what I do when I take notes is, let's just look at this one. All right, I will tag these, and then I will actually draw this image live in the sermon, or if I'm attending a conference talk, whatever, using GoodNotes on my iPad. then I'll export that as an image. I'll drop it in here, and I have these nomenclatures. So like the boxes around the verses, right? Those are verses that, in this case, my pastor is mentioning while he is preaching this sermon. And then I transclude those underneath the scripture references. These are all broken down by headers. But these are all individual verses. This was my biggest pain point coming into Obsidian, because in Rome, you just have all these things on a page. You can use block references. Block references in Obsidian pale in comparison to Roam Research. But that's part of the deal when you have everything as its own individual text file. So I was trying to figure out how to solve that problem. I eventually landed on something, I don't know if it's original, but I came up with this idea of atomic note taking from Atomic Habits by James Clear. Atomic meaning like the tiniest little pieces, right? So I have all these verses. I was like, what if I just blew this all up and everything was its own individual verse? So that's what I did. And what that does, I have all those in a separate Bible folder, separate chapter or book folders, subfolders, separate chapter subfolders. And then I have this local graph now. And this is what I love about this local graph is I have the sermon notes from this day right here. And you can apply this, other ways if you want, but this is the one for me. I'm the faith-based productivity guy, right? So I can click on Galatians 5:22. It takes me to Galatians 5:22, and I have all of the other sermon notes that have also referenced Galatians 5:22. So I can pull all of those sermon notes up side by side. I get bigger context now. I get those pictures, which already those have kind of stuck with me because I took the time to draw the pictures in the first place. It's kind of amazing to me. Like before I started doing this, if you were to ask me, what'd your pastor preach about last week? I wouldn't have been able to tell you. But I remember these visuals that I created from months ago just because I had to figure out how to do it. So I really love this. I'll go in here and I'll open all these things up. Occasionally I have a Bible college degree. And I'm an elder at my church. So occasionally I'll be called upon to preach. And this is always like the first step that I do is like, I'll go back. Okay, what did my pastor just preach on? And then I'll kind of study out those themes. I've got some Bible software where I can dig into like the original Greek and Hebrew meanings and stuff too, but I don't do that as often as I really thought I would. Really, the stuff is like the inspiration from the connecting of the dots. Like, oh, this connects over here. I never thought of it from that perspective before, and so it helps me see things through a new lens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot to take from here. Taking this big work, one of the big works in the world, the Bible. And I was thinking like back in college, I had just graduated, and it was around that time I wanted to stretch myself, and I did something I never thought I would ever do, but I auditioned to like be a part of the college theater, and eventually that like 3 plays later, that led to being a part of Hamlet. And Hamlet is like one of those where any Shakespearean work where every line, like the Bible, is up for interpretation, is up for what is really being said here. Like what is, and I find those works so interesting. And what you're showing here, Mike, is a really good way to dive into and analyze these works and remember them, make those connections, connecting the dots. This is I'm just excited about this.
Cool.
2 other topics before questions, hopefully. Your personal retreats. I know you do something special, and then managing writing projects with Kanban. So I'm not sure. Maybe we just cover one of those for now, and then we'll see what happens later.
Man, time is flying by. So I have this personal retreat framework. I actually have a course for this on my personal site, faithbasedproductivity.com. This was something that I landed on where I would go away for an entire day and just think about what happened the last quarter and set some goals for the next quarter, identify the habits that I wanted to establish, stuff like that. So I've been doing this for a while. Again, good notes. I have like a whole PDF workbook that I just load in there. But I started doing that in Obsidian, and I did the last one here in Obsidian. Let's see. Here's my personal retreats. So here's my personal retreat from Q2 2021. I start by listing my core values, making sure that these have not changed. And then I have this wheel of life exercise where I rate myself in my different areas from 0 to 10 or 1 to 10. And I've always like colored this out from the middle, and it kind of gives you a visual representation of how things are going. The idea here is that you take the lowest areas and you build your goals around that. Okay. So I've been trying for months to figure out how can I recreate this inside of Obsidian. And just the other day I had the realization that I could use a radar chart. So I'm using the charts view
Mhm.
plugin, and this is what it looks like.
Oh,
And I
nice.
absolutely love this. So it's just like a little spider web type graph, based on this. Fun and recreation is the area I want to address. I have the ratings here and then kind of some insights here. I won't spend a whole lot of time here, but one of the things that really makes this click, and I've applied this to just about every area of my life. My wife and I ask these questions when we do our date nights, is these three things right here. What should I start doing, stop doing, and keep doing?
Hmm.
Ask these questions and then give yourself a bunch of time to let your brain unravel them and figure them out. It's really easy for my personality to just try to add one more thing, add one more thing. So start doing, that's pretty easy. I can usually find a big list of things that I want to do. But I force myself every single time I do one of these personal retreats to find one thing to stop doing. And
Ooh,
that creates
that's
space
important.
and margin to take advantage of some other cool opportunities. And then at the end,
Yes.
the different goals that I'm going to set from this. So this is, I mean, nothing technically impressive about this other than the chart view, but it's just a place in this list. I find like taking these notes the day of inside of Obsidian is really fun. I look forward to it.
Yeah. So charts view. And so what is that plugin called? Is it called charts view?
It's called Charts View. Yep. So there's Obsidian Charts, and that has a radar view as well. This one just looks better, so I like this one.
I will have to experiment with this. And yeah, this is great. And it's pretty straightforward too. I mean, once you plug in that information once, you have a template and then it's easy to repeat.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. All right. So the articles thing, I have all my articles that I'm writing up here in the articles folder, but I track all these in an articles Kanban note, which looks like this. So it's just using the Kanban plugin, and there's links to each one of these. It's just double brackets. I
Hmm.
make sure every item has a pre-existing note attached to it. And then you can set the metadata that you want to show up here. So I have different kinds of articles that I'm working on. This is like a mindset article. This is just a cool app that I found for TSS Suite Setup. Another mindset one, a mindfulness Monday interview sort of a thing. So
Hmm.
Nick's just appeared on the website yesterday, and got some great feedback on that. So thank you for doing that, Nick.
Hmm.
The ones that are active, I usually will put a due date. So that's kind of like the way we manage our tasks. We do it in Notion as a team. So I do all my writing in Obsidian, though. I add a couple plugins, a focus mode plugin, better word count, stuff like that. And then I do all of the writing here. So this will take me to the article itself. I haven't really done a whole lot with this yet, but I just started this, and then the date is linked to the daily note. That's a week before it would actually publish. So that's the date that I have to be done writing it and start transferring everything up to WordPress. Editor can look at it, etc. And I love this plugin because you can just drag these between the different different columns, which kind of blows my mind when I think about that sort of functionality. I hope more plugins add that sort of thing, where it's not just a view, but it's actually you can interact with it inside of the preview mode.
It does blow my mind too. Like these are plain text files
Yep.
that you're just dragging and dropping, and somehow all the magic works.
Yep.
Um, that's the advantages of building on the bedrock. Like
Yeah.
this is stable. It's not, earthquake
Yep.
happens. Your building notes are not going to collapse. This is a well
Yep.
designed earthquake proof plain text structure.
Can I give you one more workflow? Do we have time for one
Please,
more workflow? Okay.
yeah, yeah.
I'm happy to hang out late if you're able to do that. But this is my favorite one. I have an interesting way of journaling. I
Saving
use
the
daily
best for
notes.
last.
Yeah, I use what are called daily questions, a concept I picked up in Triggers by Marshall Goldsmith. And this is instead of asking yourself a prompt like, what did I accomplish today? And then you feel bad because you have nothing to put in there. You just rate
Yeah.
yourself based on your effort. Okay, so did I do my best too? And then you fill in your own questions. So mine are grow spiritually, love my wife, love my kids, be a good friend, learn something, create something, and exercise. I'll put in a score here from 1 to 10. These are all tagged. So daily questions slash spiritual, daily questions slash wife, etc. So that applies both the daily questions tag if I wanted to just see my daily questions, and then also the individual responses for the individual tags. Same thing here with the journal entries and gratitude entries. I'll fill these in if I have something. If there's a significant event, like I'll probably create a journal entry when we're done recording here. But I don't do this every single day. I try
Hmm.
to at least do gratitude every single day, but the daily questions every single day. I one of the sticking points for this was filling this in on my iPhone at the end of the day. If I didn't fill it in, as I go, I try to do that as I go throughout my day. I'll go for a long run and I'll update the exercise one. But having the ability to open to today's daily notes in Obsidian on my iPhone makes it easy for me to just fill in these values. Then I have these values. Okay, that's great. What do I do with this information? Right. And that's where the tracker plugin comes in.
Mm.
And this is part of the personal retreat process as well, is I'll review my journal entries. So I have a note here for daily questions, and it's broken down by the different sections, and it's a tracker tag. It's going to show a line chart, and it's going to go from 0 to 10. It's going to and it's going to only, I set the date here to only go from the last periods, last quarter. So this is starting in July. When I
Mm.
render this, it looks like this. And this
Oh,
helps me see the trends, and it helps me identify, like, if there was a really bad day, like I will go click on that day, and I will figure out what are my journal entries, like what contributed to that low
Mike,
score, and how
Mike
do
was
I
a bad
avoid
friend
that.
that day. Sorry.
What's that?
You were a bad friend that day.
Yep. So yeah, like this helps me identify the contributing factors to the wheel of life stuff, and then asking myself why, like how do I create a process or a system which will fix this.
So looking at the code to make this one work, the tracker code, and then
Yep.
so the only thing that you kind of have to manage here is the start date. So like after a while, does it just keep going? So if you didn't touch these and you
Yeah,
look at them a year from now, they would show you a lot of information. Is
they
that
would
right?
just keep going, and depending on what device you're accessing it from, it may take a little while to render.
Gotcha. Well, that's kind of a nice functionality though. So even if you
Yep.
don't update it, it doesn't necessarily break, like which
All
is
the
kind of
data
nice.
points are still there. You can slice it any way you want, but it's all there.
I like this. So is that just called tracker or does that have a different name?
Yep, it's just called Tracker, and there's
Okay.
probably a couple settings in there. It's one of those plugins like Kanban where they've improved it faster than I can keep up with it. This was
Yeah.
good enough for me. So what this is doing is this is looking at the tags. You can do it different ways. You could search a specific folder, if you wanted to
Mm.
do it that way, and probably pull in like YAML metadata, like I do for the Bookworm ratings. And
Hmm.
then the search target, this is so the tag that it's looking for, in this case, daily questions / exercise. And then the start date. And then these are all settings pertaining to the line itself. So the rating, basically what's going to appear on the graph, if I, see right here on the Y graph, the rating, and then a minimum and maximum value. And there's different types of charts that you can use with this as well. There's probably a little
Okay.
bit of overlap and functionality between this and charts view. But this was available when I was trying to solve that problem with my daily questions. And so I just kind of stuck with it.
Okay. Well, this is pretty fun. So we didn't even do an introduction, which was kind of intentional, just to be a more casual chat with this. The idea is just Mike and I are chatting with each other and trying to ignore all the people in the audience. Um, yeah. So, anyways, but now we're going to transition into that.
Okay, a list of all the plugins that I use. Maybe it's easier for me to just screen share this part real quick, because to be honest, I don't even know everything that I use. I've been playing with a lot of different plugins, so I'm just gonna go. All right. Oh, auto backups. I had 500 gigs worth of backups in my Dropbox folder, so that one's no longer there. Better word count. I like this because you can select a portion of the text and it gives you the characters and word count. You can also do something kind of like the writing goals in Ulysses, where it can show the words that you've written for the day. I don't particularly use that specific feature because that's not really important to me, but I know a lot of people, you need to have something like 1,000 words a day or whatever. That's a cool way to do it. The calendar view, if you're going to use daily notes, and you should, you need to have the calendar plugin enabled charts view. That's the one that is currently only being used for my personal retreat stuff. Data view is incredible. I'm only scratching the surface with this, but I use it for creating that table, like I said, for the Bookworm ratings. Enhancing mind map, I actually don't use this a whole lot. I was playing around with this, but this is cool because this creates a draggable mind map out of your Markdown file. So kind of like Kanban, you can switch into the Kanban view or you can go to the Markdown view. Same thing with enhancing mind map, except you can drag the nodes around in the preview mode, so to speak. Focus mode, I like this too. I have that turned on. Footnote shortcut, I like creating footnotes and the articles that I write and publishing those to the blog that way, although I forget to do that more often than I should. Hotkeys plus plus, love me some hotkeys. Kanban, the Mac OS keyboard navigation, minimal theme settings. I use the minimal theme. This just allows you to like change the color and stuff like that. Natural language states, I think that's required for the review plugin, which adds, you want to look at this note again, kind of like space repetition sort of a thing, adds it to a specific daily note. Note refactor, I had this turned on, but I actually don't use this a whole lot anymore. Note composer is enough for me most of the time. It has a lot of like automation stuff. You can split everything apart by like third level headers or whatever, but I don't use a whole lot of that. I like the outliner. I like being able to use the keyboard shortcuts to move things around. Reading time. This is another thing I missed from Ulysses, where how long is it going to take to read this article? So I have that toggled on. The review plugin I mentioned, I played around with the sliding panes. Doesn't really stick for me. Todoist, I actually don't use this one anymore. I was playing around with task management though, and I love that you can just embed a Todoist web filter inside of a page. Tracker mentioned, and then Vantage. I don't use this a ton either, but I like the visual query building that you can do with that. So those are my plugins, although they will probably be different tomorrow. Okay, I see you're using both folders and a big set of flat files. What logic guided the structure that you set up? Good question, Mark. And to be honest, I feel like this is still kind of in flux. I use a combination of folders and tags to find things, and primarily folders. The tags, I like the ability to use the YAML metadata to apply those at a whole document level. So I do a lot of that. It's kind of built into the templates for like the sermon sketch notes and the book notes and things like that. Those are kind of like just in case tags, but I try not to overuse my tags a whole lot. Because the file explorer is almost always open for me in Obsidian, I try to just have, if I see like common groupings of things, I'll create a folder. That's basically the gist of it. So when I have a whole bunch of sermon notes and I'm like, oh, I think I should put those together, I'll first put them in the sermon notes folder. And then when I get too many in there, I break them down by year and month and things like that. So it's just kind of how it makes sense to my brain visually, but it's really not that big a deal because I use double brackets to link to the things that are really important. I really rely on like the local graph when I'm looking at a note to see the connections between different things. So I don't think there's a wrong way to do the folders. Let's see. Have you read a book since you instituted the practice of the 3-sentence summary? Would I write another 3-sentence summary? Good question. I don't think I have reread a book that I've added a 3-sentence summary. I do reread books, specifically books that have been very impactful to me. Like Essentialism by Greg McKeown is one that I will go back and reread from time to time. I've reread GTD several times, although the more I read that now, the more I nitpick, little holes in the system, and I've kind of evolved it to meet my own needs. And so I probably would not go back and reread that at this point. I think if I were to reread a book that I had a 3-sentence summary for, I would just update the summary if needed. But I wouldn't necessarily feel compelled to make a change there. When you process notes into Obsidian daily, weekly, when you start to update your notes in Obsidian, I'm in Obsidian pretty much all day, every day. I kind of write for a living. The the notes for the podcast that I do, the scripts for the videos, like they're all in Obsidian. So I don't have like a set interval for when I do those sorts of things. I'm just kind of always playing with it. I know you're going to have David Sparks on here, Nick, and he shared something with me though that I think is a good tip for people. Is he's like built into his daily routine half hour to play with his Life OS thing. I think he calls it like Sparky OS, where he's just going in there and he's playing with stuff. And I think play is a whole nother topic. Probably talking another hour on that. Just like this is
Yeah.
the real value from these things is when strong convictions lightly held, right? I have this idea, but I'm not going to latch onto it as like, oh, this is the best idea I have ever had. I give myself permission to play with it, and if I get bored with it, I'm not going to play with it anymore. And that's that because I'm collecting better dots. I'm not scared that like, oh, I'm not going to have another good idea to replace that. Hopefully that answers the question. But yeah, I just am in here all the time and playing with the
Yeah.
things that appeal to me. Let's see. Single vault for both personal research, professional notes. This correct? Can you discuss the pros cons for one versus several? Yeah, there's definitely some cons with this. I'm not a professional, I guess, so it doesn't really matter. But if I was a lawyer or a doctor and had a bunch of sensitive information, um, I would definitely keep that in a separate vault. For me, though, I like the ability, even if I don't make the connections, to connect all of the things there. So I think one of the things I've made a mistake with in the past is I have like my Bible sermon notes over here and I have my book notes over here. And kind of when I was starting the whole faith-based productivity thing was like, there's a lot of overlap here. I was teaching a personal management class at our Bible college. And I was like, all this stuff that the New York Times bestsellers are writing about, like these are based off of biblical principles. And so I was kind of connecting those dots already. Those would be two vaults, I think, where people would naturally draw the distinctions, but I actually find value in having them together.
Now this is really great, Mike, and especially with you just hopping in. This is our second Lighthouse session, but it's still so much of an unknown thing, and this was quite different from the first one. So we're feeling this out and experimenting, and you just leaned forward into it. So I really appreciate you for that, Mike. You do have a course coming out on Obsidian, and
Yeah, I'm
it's like
not good at
coming out
self
today or
promotion.
something.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
but
it's coming out today. If you want more
okay.
information on it, it's thesweetsetup.com/obsidian. It's called To Obsidian and Beyond. It's 46 different videos. There's some talking head videos, which is just like basic elements of PKM. I mentioned the You Are Creative video. That's where that comes from. Some basic, like I'm new to Obsidian stuff, more advanced stuff on specific ways to use some of the plugins, some workflow stuff. Included in that is a video replay of the Zero-to-Obsidian workshop that I did a couple times now. Uh, yeah, and then there's like all the Sweet Setup courses. It's worth bringing up now for people who are interested in it because there is a launch discount. So it's $99, I think, right now, and it'll probably be $149 after launch week.
That's really awesome. So take advantage of that. You get if Mike is new to you, you have a sense of his voice and how varied his interests are and his use cases, and I'm sure there's a lot of great value from that. I think it's funny. Just a side note before we get back to the Q&A is that it's like we've had a master plan to perfectly time out all of these things. Like I had the you asked me to do those questions, and I finally delivered them to you. We had this set up. You have a course launch, but it's just all. I mean, I know you're more organized than me, but I'm just kind of, in triage mode, taking care of this and that. And like, oh, here are your questions. And, oh, can you come on this? And you're like, yeah, sure, I can do that. Um, but it may look like there's a lot of coordination, but I'm really just kind of surprised at the coincidental timing of everything.
Yeah, stuff just kind of clicks into place. It started with me reaching out to you because I love your perspective on all of the sense making, note making, uh, MOCs, all that kind of stuff, PKM, and asked you to do the Mindfulness Monday interview over at the Sweet Setup because I feel like you're kind of the perfect person for it. So, but yeah, I'm happy to do this. I mentioned to Nick I was terrified of coming on here because I do feel Like I am not an expert. I feel very much like an Obsidian poser. Like and I guess, it's the trick is to find specific ways that this clicks for you, right? And so I've done that and I'm getting a ton of value from it, but I'm always in the back of my mind there's a voice. It's like no one else is going to find this interesting.
But then you remember everything you told us from this conversation.
Yeah.
Like you just have to put stuff together, connect the dots, and it's inherently valuable. And what I found in today's day and age, being connected worldwide, is that it's definitely valuable for a lot of people out there.
Cool.
Okay, back to the questions for about 9 more minutes.
Sure. I like Mike's point about creativity involved in engaging in dialogue with text from others. How does he keep note making from becoming a mere mashup of captured text? I have to credit Nick Milo for this because one of the big things I got from the Linking Your Thinking workshop was the opinion notes. I was definitely headed down this path, Joel. And what I forced myself to do was articulate, if I had something that I didn't like, why I didn't like it, or if I had something that really spoke to me, why that really spoke to me. Kind of the one I use as an example in the course a lot is the MOC that I created for habits, because with habits, there's the standard Charles Duhigg model, the 3 points, cue, routine, reward. And I've never really liked that. And I never really realized why until I started bringing in all the things that I'd captured around habits and realized James Clear has 4 steps. He has, in addition to the cue, he calls it a craving. And that craving, basically, you have a option to give in to the temptation or not. So I'm like, aha, that's what really bothers me is with the Charles Duhigg model. This is just on autopilot, and I am a rat in a cage, and there's nothing I can do about it. As soon as the cue shows up, I have to follow through with the activity, and I never really liked that. So interjected my own opinion note there, and I've finding that as I force myself to write it out on my clicky keyboard, the thoughts become clear. It's kind of magical, and I'm doing a very poor job of explaining this, but forcing yourself to sit down and actually articulate it, it's kind of like that 3 sentence summary. If you were to ask me, well, what's this book about? I kind of know, but I can't say it succinctly until I have forced myself to come up with that 3 sentence summary. And at that point, I'm able to communicate it more effectively to somebody else.
What's funny, just to dive in on that, Mike, is somehow your interpretation of Duhigg's book and mine were exactly the same. Because I think he even hints at it, but he doesn't. He keeps it 3 steps. It's like the publisher
Yep.
in him was like, you got to keep it to 3. But there
Yeah.
was a fourth one there, and I think we both graded on that. And then when James Clear's book came out, he articulated that yes, there's this fourth part to it. So just wanted to say how
Yeah.
interesting that you had that same thought on it.
Yeah, and James Clear credits BJ Fogg at the beginning of his book on atomic habits for doing all this research. And he's got a phenomenal book called Tiny Habits, where he's got different sort of views and graphs that go along with his beliefs. And so bringing all those things into one single note, especially like those images, which are all captured in my book notes for those books, and seeing how those things tie together provides a lot of insight. And then the trick is with that insight to do something with it. Um, we didn't really talk about this, but I think, Nick, you have a similar belief that I do, that there has to be some sort of output when it comes to a PKM. Like if you just take things in all of the time, you get you feel the stress. I think you call it like a mental squeeze point, right? Where it's like, there's so
Mhm.
much information on this topic. What do I even think about this? So you force yourself to like gather all the pieces, put them on the workbench and see how they fit together. I like to describe it as like little mental Lego blocks, and you're clicking these things together, and you're able to build, whatever you want out of it. But having the pieces when you need them is important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Was there a book talking about making sketch notes that I learned through the app that I mentioned? I learned through trial and error, but there is a really good book for this. Mike Rohde is the kind of the sketchnote guy. He happens to live in Wisconsin, and I have met him. So he's a really cool guy. But he wrote the sketchnote handbook, and lots of good stuff in there. Basic idea that really hit with me is that you're capturing ideas, not art, so you don't have to judge your work. Um, I wrote about this for the Sweet Setup a while back, my sketchnoting journey, and uh, I share my first sketch note in that article. It's basically a stick figure and a bunch of words. So that's where I started. You've seen where I ended up. Basically, if I can do it, anybody can do it. It just takes practice. Can I demo how I make those amazing drawings real time on my iPad? I really can't do that in real time, but I do use GoodNotes. And I like doing them digitally because there's no pressure now. If I mess something up, I can always just hit the undo button. There's a balance there too, though. I did start with physical pens first, and that was probably a good thing because it forced me to just keep going and not be judging the drawing that I was making. But I do find that when it comes to like more complex ideas that I get, I'm not afraid to try those things on the iPad because I can just I can just hit the undo button and try again if I want to. Also, they have in the newer versions of iOS, you can just kind of like draw a circle and then you keep your pencil on the page, and then it will auto snap to like a perfect circle or a perfect square.
Mhm.
So I'll use those for like the boxes around the verses. I try not to use it for the sketches themselves a whole lot because I think it just looks kind of weird. There's something charming to me, whimsical about the non-perfect lines. But if you really did want it to be, perfectly square, it's easy to do that without slowing you down. Where did I get my copy of the Bible pre-divided into one verse per file? I had a friend who understands scripting make it for me, Joe Bulig. But there's actually a forum thread in the Obsidian forum called Bible Study in Obsidian where he shared that script. And I use the King James version, so it's all royalty free. But there are other people who are doing it with like other versions. If there's something else that you wanted to do, I believe you can just download that one though from the Obsidian forum. The ideas that are found in many books, that's one of the reasons I start calling things out as their own individual pages. Like Occam's Razor, for example, is a note that I have. That one pops up in just about every productivity book you read. The simplest solution is the best solution. Book summary services I do not use. I kind of feel like they're cheating. It's like going to the gym and you're going to work out, but you don't put any weight on the bar. That's just my own personal preference. I don't think there's not necessarily anything bad with them. If you want to understand the gist of a book without reading the actual book, go ahead and sign up for Blinkist or something like that. But I think the problem is when people will read a Blinkist review and then, oh, I read the book. No, you had a conversation with somebody who read the book, but you didn't have a conversation with the actual author. So there's a lot that you're missing there.
Just to hop in on your metaphor, it's almost like you're going to the gym and you're watching somebody else work out.
Yeah,
I mean, it's more
true.
value than that, but it's maybe closer to that. Yeah.
Yeah. I got really offended one time when somebody who I've been trying to get to read books for a very long time is like, "Hey, this person is making me read this book. What do you think of the Blinkist summary of this?" And I'm like, "Get that out of here! You read the book."
Nice.
Somebody had asked about Obsidian versus Ulysses because I had done the course at the Sweet Setup for Ulysses. Ulysses is a really really good writing app. There are always been a couple things about it that have bugged me. One is the non-standard Markdown. That was the thing that bugged me about Roam Research too. It doesn't have standard Markdown. So I've kind of always been looking for a replacement for Ulysses for myself, and I've been able to make Obsidian be that for me. However, if you're just looking for a writing app, Ulysses is amazing, especially with it being part of SetApp. I can't recommend SetApp enough. It's a $10 a month service that gives you access to a whole bunch of really killer Mac and iOS apps. MindNote is part of SetApp. Ulysses is on there, and then like 200 other really great apps. It's kind of like Netflix for quality Mac apps. Top three book recommendations. This is hard, and I think it would be different if I had a conversation with individual people too. But I will say the book that I recommend more than any other recently, and probably is the one that is most appropriate for this audience, would be The Great Mental Models, Volume 1 by Rihanna Baubin and Shane Parrish. It's a really well put together book. It's very visual, and they describe it as a lattice work. Yep, Farnham Street, exactly. A lattice work of mental models that you can use, and it's kind of presented that way. Like, here's some models that you can use to look at the world through, but it's up to you to choose which one to use in which situation. You kind of have to do that through trial and error. Second one I would recommend, I mentioned it already, so maybe this is cheating, but Liminal Thinking by Dave Gray. I really did love that book. And I feel like that one and the Great Mental Models actually go very well together. Liminal Thinking just encourages you, gives you the kick in the pants that you need to look at things from other perspectives. I feel like the world that we live in right now is very politicized, and doesn't matter what side of the aisle you find yourself on, it's easy to surround yourself with people who are going to villainize the other side and just reinforce but really limiting beliefs that you have based on your limited experience of reality. So I find it a good reminder to, you need to include everybody in this conversation if you really are going to attempt to know the truth about what's going on. The third one, I'm going to say Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, just because I feel this is one of those books that everybody should read at some point in their life. Viktor Frankl is kind of known as the attitude guy, and this is kind of his memoir of his experiences being in the concentration camps. And in the very, just to give you an idea of the quality of this guy, in the introduction, he talks about how he actually had obtained a research visa to flee the country because they knew that Nazi Germany was coming and they knew where they were going to end up. And he recognized that a lot of the people that he lived with were not going to be able to get out. And he's like, if they're going to have to go through this, I'm going to go through this. And it's split up into these different parts. The last part is kind of his experience with people who actually made it through and had a hard time readjusting because they couldn't adjust their attitude. They just held on to this resentment. There's the bitterness. So many life lessons to be learned from that one. Really, really hard to read. A lot of unspeakable evil things that he experienced, but I feel like it's one of those books you got to take your medicine, and you're a better person for having gone through it.
Can I admit to something here? In high school, I enjoyed that book so much, especially the last section. Not especially, but in addition, at the end, he has his logotherapy where he talks about meaning through suffering, and I don't know, as an impressionable teenager, I never returned it back to my English class. I just kept it. So, I'm sorry, Miss Barrick, because she didn't get the book back from me. It just left such an impression.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a really good note to end on, but there are a few questions, and I just was hoping you're the only one that can really answer this. But what's the difference between what the Suite setup course is offering on Obsidian versus your experiences with the Linking Your Thinking workshop? Because you're the only one who knows both.
Oh boy, it's a tough one. All right, so Linking Your Thinking, the workshop requires a whole lot of work on your end. It's worth it. That capstone project that you force everybody to do, that's essential to what you're going to get out of the course. You're showing up live and you're doing it. The Suite setup is on-demand videos, so it's more tactical, I would say. There's a lot of really practical things that you share too, Nick, but like that's the whole goal of the Suite setup is we want to help people be more productive and more creative using their Apple technology. And there's going to be people on different ends of the spectrum, but like even like the Zero-to-Obsidian workshop, which is kind of the very first version of this course, was like, okay, we're going to assume you know nothing about Obsidian. We're going to help you identify one specific thing, one specific pain point in your note-taking workflow. And by the end of the 2-hour workshop, you're going to have a system in place which is going to provide you value. It's very different than like, here's everything that you need to consider when crafting your own PKM system, and now you have to do it. And I'm not saying one is the right way. I feel these are very complementary, in fact. I've learned a lot from Nick. You'll see in the course some of the notes that I captured, and I point people to Linking Your Thinking all of the time. But I'm not trying to just like recreate what you've done either. There are certain things that have rubbed off on me, you know, and I'm gonna put my own spin on some of this stuff and talk about like the atomic note taking and breaking things down into the itty bitty pieces because that's what allowed like the sermon sketch notes to click for me, right?
Mhm.
So I will say this is the way that I do this. And if you're looking to do something similar, you should do it this way too. There's a whole list of like, these are the recommended plugin settings. If you're new to this and you don't know what any of this sort of stuff is, a whole lot of workflow specific stuff. Here's how
Mhm.
here's how you could use this for project, uh, managing a project. Here's my writing workflow thing is in there, stuff like that.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Mike. And I will say what I could imagine, depending on your time and resources, financially, but start off with Mike's, and if you want to, I think with linking your thinking, it's a broader approach to it's intentionally so of how it's
Mhm.
not a course on Obsidian. It's a course, it's a workshop on how we go about thinking about managing information. We look at our relationship to information, and with this age of the linked note, how we can use that to be our best selves and create a system that will scale with us over time. And so I do, from what I understand, see them as quite complementary. And but as far as getting up to speed with Obsidian and tailoring that to a use case of yours, it sounds like I can't recommend Mike's enough. Like start with that and then see where you're at if you want to keep going deeper down the rabbit hole. And the thing I will say with linking your thinking is it's also a community, which I
Yes.
think that's where a lot of the crazy value is coming from.
It's like
Is
going to thinking camp.
yeah, yeah. But enough of everything. One last time, round of applause, Mike. This was just fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on.
For
Really
sure.
enjoyed
Thanks
your
for having
time.
me.
Yeah, I have a couple books to look into now, and if I use your rule, I should just go ahead and see if I can purchase them.
Just buy him. Yep.